Oh, here we go. All right. The flaming chalice, if you can see it, is lit, which means that we can begin. And I'm going to, we usually have an inspirational reading, so I'm going to sort of jump ahead in the program by reading a very short poem by one of our poets of this morning, Joy Harjo, called "This Land is a Poem." This land is a poem of ochre and burnt sand I could never write, unless paper were the sacrament of sky and ink the broken line of wild horses staggering the horizon miles away. Even then, does anything written ever matter to the earth, wind, and sky? Well, this morning we are privileged to welcome Manuela Williams. Manuela was proposed to us by Ann Keniston, who is on a medical leave, so she's not able to be with us this morning. Anne had only the highest praise for this prize graduate student of hers, Manuela. Manuela was born and raised in Las Vegas, received her master's degree in English from UNLV. She worked briefly for a law firm after graduation and then did a stint in freelance editing and writing. She moved to Reno in 2019 to begin the Master in Fine Arts program under Ann Keniston at UNR. She is already the author of two little books of poetry, one called Witch, which was published by Dancing Girl Press in 2019, and then Ghost in Girl Costume, which has just come out this year. Her poems have appeared in Bear Review, Bone Bouquet, The Mantle Poetry, the Night Music Journal. She's also poetry columnist for something called Do It Yourself MFA. And how she manages to do all of this and pursue her own MFA, maybe she can tell us. She talks about growing up in a household where she wrote short stories, and her mother would embarrass her by printing them out and pasting them all over the walls around the house and sending them out to friends and family. and she said she actually only started writing poetry in 2015 to deal with a rough spot in her life. She finds writing poetry to be a healing process, right up there with sitting next to Lake Tahoe and other bodies of water. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Manuela, except to say that we are together reading two poets, two distinguished women poets this morning. The first, read by Manuela, will be Louise Glick. Ms. Glick is the most recent Nobel Laureate in literature. Perhaps Manuela will have more to say about Ms. Glick. I will be reading from our current US Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo. More about her later. Manuela?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for hosting me this morning. This is so exciting. So yes, I will be reading from Louise Glick. So just a little brief introduction for her. She's a very accomplished poet. She's accomplished so much in her lifetime, and I really do admire her personally. So Louise Glick, she was named the 12th Poet Laureate of the United States in 2003. Her work has won numerous awards. So her collection, I think it's her most recent collection, or one of them at least, Averno, was a National Book Award finalist. And in 2020, she won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I'm sorry, my cat is scratching right next to me, so she might make an appearance soon. So I'm really drawn to her work. I apologize. Stop scratching, please. I'm really drawn to her work. She tends to be a very direct poet. She uses a lot of, I would argue, direct language. And as you'll see in the poems that I read, she doesn't hide behind a lot of metaphor and simile. She's just very straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So this is the first poem that I'll be reading, and it's called Terminal Resemblance, and it's from her collection Ararat, which was published in 1990. When I saw my father for the last time, we both did the same thing. He was standing in the doorway to the living room, waiting for me to get off the telephone. That he wasn't also pointing to his watch was a signal he wanted to talk. Talk for us always meant the same thing. He'd say a few words, I'd say a few back. That was about it. It was the end of August, very hot, very humid. Next door, workmen dumped new gravel on the driveway. My father and I avoided being alone. We didn't know how to connect, to make small talk. There didn't seem to be any other possibilities. So this was special. When a man's dying, he has a subject. It must have been early morning. Up and down the street, sprinklers started coming on. The gardener's truck appeared at the end of the block, then stopped, parking. My father wanted to tell me what it was like to be dying. He told me he wasn't suffering. He said he kept expecting pain, waiting for it, but it never came. All he felt was a kind of weakness. I said I was glad for him, that I thought he was lucky. Some of the husbands were getting in their cars, going to work. Not people we knew anymore. New families, families with young children. The wives stood on the steps, gesturing or calling. We said goodbye in the usual way. No embrace, nothing dramatic. When the taxi came, my parents watched from the front door, arm in arm. My mother blowing kisses, as she always does, because it frightens her when a hand isn't being used. But for a change, my father didn't just stand there. This time, he waved. That's what I did at the door to the taxi. Like him, waved to disguise my hands trembling. And I'll just say a couple words about this poem. Stylistically, I guess, I would argue that this is one of Louise Glick's more narrative poems. You can see it tells a story, right? It's not written in free verse. There isn't any rhyme really going on. There aren't a lot of elaborate descriptions, but she's setting a scene here, a very clear scene, and she's really focusing on this relationship with her father, which she does a lot throughout this collection. Ararat is about her relationship with her father, and kind of processing his death through this collection. And I was just really moved by this poem. I was like, oh no, am I going to cry? It's restrained, but it's very emotional. I think it's a very emotional poem. So the next one that I'm going to share is called First Memory. And it's very different from the first one. It's very short. And this is also from the same collection. First Memory. Long ago, I was wounded. I lived to revenge myself against my father, not for what he was, for what I was. From the beginning of time, in childhood, I thought that pain meant I was not loved. It meant I loved. So also fantastic poem, one of my favorites, very short compared to the first one. And it's not as narrative, right, as the first one. It's very compact. And I just loved this line break here. I'm gonna nerd out for a second. This long ago, I was wounded. I lived to revenge myself. Lovely line break. And what strikes me the most about this poem are these last three lines, this idea that pain somehow makes us stronger, right? It means that we love fiercely, right? And sometimes we get hurt, but we bounce back from it. So that's what I take away from this poem. And the final poem that I will read from Miss Glick is called Grandmother in the Garden. And this one's an older poem. It was published back in 1967 in Poetry magazine. Again, pretty short. So Grandmother in the Garden. The grass below the willow of my daughter's wash is curled with earthworms, and the world is measured into row on row of unspiced houses, painted to seem real. The drugged Long Island summer sun drains pattern from those empty sleeves. Beyond my grandson squealing in his pen, I have survived my life. The yellow daylight lines the oak leaf, and the wire vines melt with the unchanged changes of the baby. My children have their husbands' hands, my husbands framed, propped bald as a baby on their pianos. My tremendous man. I close my eyes, and all the clothes I have thrown out come back to me. The banners of my daughter's slips, they drift. I see the sheer summer cottons drift, equivalent to air. So this poem, she uses a lot more, I think, vivid imagery. And she's using some more traditional poetic devices, I think, here. You see the rhyme in the second and third lines. So of my daughter's wash, it's curled with earthworms and the world. And I think that kind of gives us a very lazy summer reading. It slows you down, and it's just gorgeous how using certain words just changes an entire reading. And you see that again here with the drugged Long Island summer sun drains. Just lovely, lovely language. And in this one, this is a very, very Louise Glick line. She can be a little cynical, I think, in some of her poems. I have survived my life. What an interesting line, right? Okay. And I'm going to finish my reading with one of my own poems. And this is actually from part of my master's degree program, I have to write a book of poetry. That's part of my requirements. So this is from the book that I wrote. And a little bit more about me. In my spare time, I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy. And with this poem, I guess I'm calling this a love poem to the science fiction genre a little bit. I'm always interested in, I don't know, in the fantastical, right? It's an escape for me. So this poem is called Space Opera Heroine. And it's about a main character in a space opera. She pretends she's not afraid of falling down the long, dark throat of the sky, a single persistent force bearing down like 1,000 mattresses. She pretends she's not afraid of the solar system, pressed up against an egg yellow sun, smithereened by meteor strike or giant wormhole. It's all part of her show, her one-woman act, pretending to forget the cut of natural light, the weight of decisions, her own moon slow blinking back at her. She wants to see her name lasered into holes, wants to know the art of escape and dangerous maneuvers, wants to be better, the kind of woman her mother raised, some kind of humble justice dispensing machine, consistently stuck between a rock and a hard place, pretending to choose correctly every time. So just a little bit about this. This is obviously very differently formatted from Louise Glick's poems. And I always like using the page when I write poetry. I kind of see it as a canvas. So when you're writing fiction, you tend to write everything the same, break things into paragraphs. And something that I really love about poetry is, again, being able to use the page as a canvas. Like, why not, right? Play with spaces, play with stanza breaks. So I tried to do that with this particular poem. And this is actually, I might revise this a little more and just use the page even more to make these lines look like stars in the universe. So that is it for me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Oh, very good. Well, actually, the other thing I like about the arrangement of your lines is the sense of falling all the way through the poem, all the way down to that decision that she always gets right, or she's going to always get right, right? Yeah, that's lovely.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to, gee, where does that thing go? No, something else. Where did it go? Okay, so I'm going to switch to an entirely different poet, a very different poet, actually, Joy Harjo. And Joy Harjo is a Native American, obviously our first Native American poet laureate. And she's also a musician, saxophonist, and performer. She's the author of some 9 books of poetry, several plays, children's books. She's also edited several anthologies of Native American poetry. She's received the Ruth Lilly Prize for Lifetime Achievement from the Poetry Foundation. She's also received the Wallace Stevens Award from the Academy of American Poets, a couple of National Endowment for the Arts fellowships and a Guggenheim Fellowship. And she's actually just begun her 3rd term as U.S. Poet Laureate. She's a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. And she is a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation and lives in Tulsa. She graduated from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and she took her MFA at the University of Iowa. And you'll see a reference to that. So I'm going to ask Linda to play a video recording of Joy Harjo reading one of her poems called Speaking Tree. And Linda, are you ready? Linda?
Yes, I'm getting on it right now, sir.
Okay, there you go. All right, all right. Well, this will be interesting. We found it to be a challenge when we were rehearsing a few moments ago.
All right, let's see if I can do this. Oh, let's see here. I wonder, Manuela, you've stopped sharing, right? And Dr. Murphy, you're not sharing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, here we go. Well, that didn't work, did it? Okay, let's go back here.
Where I was living on that bluff that overlooked Knoxville. And it was the same bluff my grandfather Manahui stood on with his warriors as they looked down over that then very small town to see where the best horses were that they could steal. But it wasn't stealing because those were still Muskogee lands. This is called Speaking Tree. And it starts with a quote by my friend Sandra Cisneros. We went to graduate school together at the University of Iowa, and we've remained friends ever since. I had a beautiful dream. I was dancing with a tree. That's Sandra. That's very much Sandra. Some things on this earth are unspeakable. Genealogy of the broken. A shy wind threading leaves after a massacre, or the smell of coffee and no one there. Some humans say trees are not sentient beings, but they do not understand poetry, nor can they hear the singing of trees when they are fed by wind or water music, or hear their cries of anguish when they are broken and bereft. Now, I am a woman longing to be a tree planted in a moist, dark earth between sunrise and sunset. I cannot walk through all realms. I carry a yearning I cannot bear alone in the dark. What shall I do with all this heartache? The deepest rooted dream of a tree is to walk even just a little ways from the place next to the doorway to the edge of the river of life and drink. I have heard trees talking long after the sun has gone down. Imagine what it would be like to dance close together in this land of water and knowledge, to drink deep what is undrinkable.
I love that characterization of trees as sentient beings. And that reminds me of Thoreau's own statement that trees cry aloud when they are cut, and claiming that he himself has heard them. Obviously, Joy Harjo is a much more mystical poet than the very direct Louise Glick. So Linda, if you can show us that first Joy Harjo poem. She had some horses. Now, this poem is a little longer than those that you have seen so far. And it exemplifies a poetic device called anaphora, which is obviously a Greek term for repetition. It's repetition of a beginning line. Epiphora is a term for repetition of a terminal line. This may be the most extreme example of anaphora in all of English literature, actually, since every line begins with she had some horses, or she had horses. She had some horses. She had horses who were bodies of sand. She had horses who were maps drawn of blood. She had horses who were skins of ocean water. She had horses who were the blue air of sky. She had horses who were fur and teeth. She had horses who were clay and would break. She had horses who were splintered red cliff. She had some horses. She had horses with eyes of train. She had horses with full brown thighs. She had horses who laughed too much. She had horses who threw rocks at glass houses. She had horses who licked razor blades. She had some horses. She had horses who danced in their mother's arms. She had horses who thought they were the sun and their bodies shone and burned like stars. She had horses who waltzed nightly on the moon. She had horses who were much too shy and kept quiet in stalls of their own making. She had some horses. She had horses who liked creek stomp dance songs. She had horses who cried in their beer. She had horses who spit at male queens who made them afraid of themselves. She had horses who said they weren't afraid. She had horses who lied. She had horses who told the truth, who were stripped bare of their tongues. She had some horses. She had horses who called themselves horse. She had horses who called themselves spirit and kept their voices secret and to themselves. She had horses who had no names. She had horses who had books of names. She had some horses. She had horses who whispered in the dark, who were afraid to speak. She had horses who screamed out of fear of the silence, who carried knives to protect themselves from ghosts. She had horses who waited for destruction. She had horses who waited for resurrection. She had some horses. She had horses who got down on their knees for any savior. She had horses who thought their high price had saved them. She had horses who tried to save her, who climbed in her bed at night and prayed as they raped her. She had some horses. She had some horses she loved. She had some horses she hated. These were the same horses. So now you'll never forget what an opera is. And the interesting thing here is, in contrast to Louise Glick, who is sort of stripped bare of symbol and metaphor, you can see these horses stand for many, many different things. And they were all the same horses. So, now, I thought, Linda, if you can move on. It looks like we should have time to read this poem, not quite as long, but a little longer than the Louise Glick poems. It's called In Mystic. My path is a cross of burning trees lit by crows carrying fire in their beaks. I ask the guardians of these lands for permission to enter. I am a visitor to this history. No one remembers to ask anymore, they answer. What do I expect in this New England seaport town near the birthplace of democracy, where I am a ghost? Even a casino can't make an Indian real, or should I say native, or savage, or demon, and with what trade language? I am trading a backwards look for jeopardy. I agree with the ancient European maps. There are monsters beyond imagination that troll the waters. The Puritans determined ships did fall off the edge of the world. I am happy to smell the sea. Walk the narrow, winding streets of shops and restaurants, and delight in the company of friends, trees, and small winds. I would rather not speak with history, but history came to me. It was dark before daybreak when the fire sparked. The men left on a hunt from the Pequot village here where I stand. The women and children left behind were set afire. I do not want to know this, but my gut knows the language of bloodshed. Over 600 were killed to establish a home for God's people, crowed the Puritan leaders in their Sunday sermons. And then history was gone in a betrayal of smoke. There is still burning, though we live in a democracy erected over the burial ground. This was given to me to speak. Every poem is an effort at ceremony. I asked for a way in. And this poem is from a collection of hers called Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. And certainly it is a remarkable juxtaposition of our legends of national foundation, the coming of the pilgrims, even the coming of our own denomination. And of course, the real history of the subjugation of Native peoples. Well, let's move on to the final Joy Harjo poem called Fire. Now, you've already heard the poem "This Land is a Poem," and by the way, poetry stands for a great many things. Many different things by many different poets. But Joy Harjo has made the point that a poem is a house of spirits. And I think we can see that in this poem. Fire. A woman can't survive by her own breath alone. She must know the voices of mountains. She must recognize the foreverness of blue sky. She must flow with the elusive bodies of night winds who will take her into herself. Look at me. I am not a separate woman. I am a continuance of blue sky. I am the throat of the mountains, a night wind who burns with every breath she takes. And that poem is from What Moon Drove Me to This. So, forgive us if this woman's poem is read to you by a man, but I hope it worked for you nevertheless. So, well, I think you will agree with me that Joy Harjo represents a much more mystical and in some sense spiritual use of poetry than the Louise Glick poems that you heard. On the other hand, I think it helps to juxtapose the two very different styles of poetry. And well, we have plenty of time, so actually, I might just. You can see there are a great many more Louise Glick poems that have been gathered together in this anthology. So we can read some more at the end, perhaps. In any case, Linda, why don't you throw up my poem, which is also very different from any that you've heard this morning. But you'll see that it's very topical. And it's entitled A Cellist for Mariupol. Now, some of you might have realized in the many news reports from Mariupol that Mariupol means the city of Mary, or Mary's city. And this poem makes use of phrases and terms derived from the Eastern Orthodox liturgy, both of the Ave Maria and the Eucharist. And Theotokos is one of those terms, and it means bringer of God. The poem also juxtaposes two bread lines, the one in Mariupol and the one in Sarajevo. Hence, also it evokes the cellist Semailovich, who played Albinoni's Adagio for 22 days, commemorating the 22 people in that bread line in Sarajevo, bombed by the Serbians. The cellist for Mariupol. Holy Mary, Mother of God, Theotokos, pray for us now and at the hour of our deaths. We were standing in line for a meager slice of bread, body of Christ given up for you. Then the Russians came and shot us all. There is our blood on the sidewalk, blood of Christ, blood of the fall, poured out for you and for the forgiveness of sins, for the forgiveness of this sin. In Sarajevo, the rocket struck 22 in line for bread, body of Christ given up for you beneath the angry sky. Their blood poured out for you on the broken stones of Bosnia and the ruins of that bakery. Came Semailovich for 22 days and poured out the Adagio. Are you not crazy to play your cello where the rockets are falling every day? Are they not crazy to drop the rockets while I am playing my cello, where I am playing my cello? These ruins are sacred now, and their silence weeps on the wind. In Mariupol, there is no cellist. City of Mary, weep for your children who had no adagio for their blood, no silence for their memory, no bread for their hunger, and only willowed wind for breath. Mary, full of grace and full of grief, blessed among women, for blessed is the song of your womb, which has borne the Savior of our souls. Walk with us now among the riven stones. Who bombs these children lying beneath those stones? A bloody shoe here and a broken doll there. Where there were people in line for bread, now only dust. No birds sing in Mariupol, no cello, no adagio, no prayer, no orison. Even the wind is silent now. Rain wets the dust. So I hope everyone noticed that each stanza became shorter, so that at the end, the buildings standing in Mariupol were those 4 words. Yeah. So, well, Manuela, do you have any comments or thoughts?
Oh, I was just, that last line was just devastating. I loved how it got shorter and you're left with that single line and the punctuation, just wonderful, really wonderful. And I want to ask you, what your process is in composing a poem, if you don't mind sharing. I would be very interested to hear about that.
I don't start a poem until something comes to me. Oftentimes in sleep. So I love to spend a night tossing and turning with these lines, spinning in my head. And so then the next day, or if I have to rush off to the hospital, maybe days later, I'll come back to it, try to remember those lines from sleep and create a poem out of them. I think this one, frankly, I think is different from anything I've ever written. I don't think I've ever written anything about a news story before, for example. But I don't know. I think for many of us, the events in Ukraine just preoccupy the mind in such a horrifying, angst-driven way that I couldn't get it out of my head. And this was this poem was one way to sort of expiate at least some of that pain. And I know you talk about the healing role of reading and writing poetry, and this was one of those things. See, I see. Oh, well, okay, yes, and oh, Chris Stanton has checked in. So, Chris is a fellow physician poet who whom I've had the privilege of actually sharing this poem with. One of the few friends who has heard it before. So, well, thank you for that. And Jenny Kersey is thanking you, Manuela, for sharing your wonderful talent with us.
That is so very kind. Thank you.
Very good. Well, do you want to throw in another Louise Glick?
Absolutely, poem? Yes. I don't have it typed up, so I'm just going to read it, if that's okay. And I'll read something from Averno, and I'll show the book on my screen here. So this collection I actually read for the first time in Anne Keniston's workshop, her poetry workshop. She assigned this book. And unfortunately, when I was reading this book, it was around the time my grandmother passed away, and we had a very close relationship. She was a mother figure to me. And I was really moved by this book, Averno. It was a National Book Award finalist. And as is the theme with my reading this morning, it deals with death, especially the mother-daughter relationship. And what Miss Glick does that I think is so interesting is she draws on myth. The myth of Persephone and Hades. And she isn't just retelling this myth. She's giving it a life of its own, right? And she's putting her own voice into this myth. So I think I will read. I'll read Persephone the Wanderer. And this is a little longer, but I think we have time. And this is the last poem in the book. And I do get a little emotional when I read this, but you know what? I'm giving myself permission to be emotional. Okay. Persephone the Wanderer. In the second version, Persephone is dead. She dies. Her mother grieves. Problems of sexuality need not trouble us here. Compulsively, in grief, Demeter circles the earth. We don't expect to know what Persephone is doing. She is dead. The dead are mysteries. We have here a mother and a cipher. This is accurate to the experience of the mother as she looks into the infant's face. She thinks, I remember when you didn't exist. The infant is puzzled. Later, the child's opinion is she has always existed, just as her mother has always existed in her present form. Her mother is like a figure at a bus stop, an audience for the bus's arrival. Before that, she was the bus, a temporary home or convenience. Persephone, protected, stares out the window of the chariot. What does she see? A morning in early spring, in April? Now her whole life is beginning. Unfortunately, it's going to be a short life. She's going to know really only two adults, death and her mother. But two is twice what her mother has. Her mother has one child, a daughter. As a god, she could have had 1,000 children. We begin to see here the deep violence of the earth, whose hostility suggests she has no wish to continue as a source of life. And why is this hypothesis never discussed? Because it is not in the story. It only creates the story. In grief after the daughter dies, the mother wanders the earth. She is preparing her case like a politician. She remembers everything and admits nothing. For example, her daughter's birth was unbearable. Her beauty was unbearable. She remembers this. She remembers Persephone's innocence, her tenderness. What is she planning, seeking her daughter? She is issuing a warning whose implicit message is, what are you doing outside my body? You ask yourself, why is the mother's body safe? The answer is, this is the wrong question, since the daughter's body doesn't exist except as a branch of the mother's body that needs to be reattached at any cost. When a god grieves, it means destroying others, as in war, while at the same time petitioning to reverse agreements, as in war also. If Zeus will get her back, winter will end. Winter will end, spring will return. The small pestering breezes that I so loved, the idiot yellow flowers. Spring will return, a dream based on a falsehood that the dead return. Persephone was used to death. Now, over and over, her mother hauls her out again. You must ask yourself, are the flowers real? If Persephone returns, there will be one of two reasons. Either she was not dead, or she is being used to support a fiction. I think I can remember being dead. Many times in winter, I approached Zeus. Tell me, I would ask him, how can I endure the earth? And he would say, in a short time, you will be here again. And in the time between, you will forget everything. Those fields of ice will be the meadows of Elysium. And that's how she ends the book. And it's beautiful. She's so academic. Miss Glick is so academic sometimes in her poems. And I really admire that, especially in her poems about grief. Just this almost clinical detachment. But there are moments of emotion too. You know, how can I endure the earth? What a beautiful line. And it really does end, hopefully, I think. One day you will, the fields of ice will become the meadows of Elysium. So there's this theme of rebirth. And I think it's just such a fantastic way to end a volume of poetry. So.
I'm glad you chose that one to read, Manuela, because it illustrates something that we didn't see in the first poems that you read, namely the way in which Louise Glick uses Greek mythology for actually the metaphor and symbol that is absent from her other poems. It also reminded me of a poem of my own that I ran across recently. I've been trying to collect my poems into something that would serve as a book, maybe. Everything that I read is publishers aren't interested in anything less than 40 pages. And I think I'm up to 30. So I started looking through poems written many, many years ago, including one that is a lament for a miscarriage, a spontaneous abortion that uses Persephone as the mother who is descended into the womb of the earth to bring back a life, and the baby like Eurydice looks back and instead arrives dead and knows only, to use Louise Glick's phrase, mother and death as the only two adults. So it's an interesting juxtaposition that suddenly leapt to my mind, like one of those sleeping lines of poetry I referred to. So, well, we have a little time. I'll read a little Louise Glick too then, here we are. This is this is a poem that might take a little thought, so I'll read it slowly. It's called Brennende Liebe. Dearest love, the roses are in bloom again, cream and rose. To either side of the brick walk, I pass among them with my white umbrella as the sun beats down upon the oval plots like pools and the grass, willows, and the grove of statuary. So the days go by, fine days. I take my tea beneath the elm, half turned, as though you were beside me saying, flowers that could take your breath away. And always on the tray a rose, and always the sun branded on the river, and the men in summer suits in linen, and the girls, their skirts circled in shadow. Last night, I dreamed that you did not return. Today's fair, the little maid filled a silver bowl shaped like a swan with roses for my bedside, with the dark red they call Brennende Liebe, which I find so beautiful. And I probably should have said at the beginning that Brennende Liebe means burning love. So it begins as dearest love and ends with burning love, which is, of course, a shade of a rose, which is lovely. So, well, do you have another one, Manuela?
Let's see. I think somebody in the chat. Can we hear another of Manuela's poems? Oh dear.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a good idea. Let's do that.
Okay. I'm so glad that I have a copy of my poems right next to me. Let's see.
Good idea.
You'll have to be patient though as I go through these. Oh my. Okay. So I do have one in mind, and it's different from my other ones. Let me look it up here. Here it is. Okay. So I just to give a little context for this poem, I write a lot about trauma in my work because again, I'm a firm believer, art is healing, poetry is healing, using poetry to work through things pretty much. I'm a firm believer in that. And I found writing about particular things that happen to me, it's hard. And it's terrifying also to share with people and to be vulnerable, right? So this poem, it's very fragmented and it is about attempting to uncover memories and to write about them. So it's called The Life's Framework. Remove one fact and a life becomes lopsided. The tree outside drops its figs. Upstairs, a window slams shut and the frame rattles. Everything around me rattles like a flimsy frame. The house is skeleton. Upstairs, a door slams shut and my skeleton shakes. I look at my lopsided face in the mirror. With the correct shade, I can change its shape, its structure. Like magic, there are cheekbones, a defined jaw. Ta-da, an excavated memory, a skeleton. What did I feel? That stabbing pain and then nothing. I poke at the edges with my tongue. The structure's all there, but buried. The true shape of it. Revealed with the right shade, a brush, a steady hand. Outside, there are figs on the ground. The ceiling light burns hot. What is it? I must have stood outside. I must have plucked figs from the ground. Remove one fact and a life loses its structure. I can restructure my skeleton. Give me a brush. Look. So yeah, this poem for me is very much about excavating, right? Excavating painful memories. And I use the metaphor of a brush, right? I'm kind of removing layer by layer to get at the heart, right, of a very painful memory. So that was my intention with that poem.
Well, it intrigues me the way in which you use the image of a house and its window, and reminds me of a book by Gaston Bachelard, who was a popular French literary critic in the days when I was an undergraduate and pursuing a master's in the writing seminars. And his book Poetics of Space, in fact, sort of elaborates the idea of poesy as a house, and the ways in which we use the spaces of a house to create a poem. So in any case, I think we're approaching the end of the hour, and let's see if there are any questions in the chat box. It looks like Chris Stanton has praised you for your courage and honesty in reading this, Manuela.
Thank you.
So kudos to you.
Thank you.
All right, and someone else says beautiful. Thank you, Manuela. And thank you, another Leah and her baby CJ say thank you for sharing your vulnerability. And then Kathleen Maloney thanks both of us for the poetry forum today, saying she is a sequential linear thinker and tends to steer away from poetry. Thank you for making poetry accessible, even to me, who tends to be intimidated by a poem. Well, I'm glad you were less intimidated today, Kathleen, and thank you for your courage in showing up. So with that, I will extinguish the flaming chalice here, but I hope we have not extinguished your burning interest in poetry, all of you. And let me say that in 2 weeks, the Sunday Forum on the 17th will feature Reverend Kathleen DeBoos, who is going to talk to us about innovations in worship, new ways to worship. And Karen is is just getting back from her sabbatical, so I don't know whether the worship service will reflect that or not. We'll see. There's not much time left. All right. So thank you all. And Manuela, thank you very, very much for sharing this hour with us. I hope we can have you back on another occasion. So stay in touch.
Yes, thank you so much. This was just a wonderful way to spend a Sunday morning. So thank you all so much.
Well,
and I mean that sincerely.
I can see that. And thank you. All right. So with that, we'll close this hour, and all who need to can get ready for our worship service at 10:30. Thank you very much.
Good job, honey.